The following is the testimony of Maks Rössler, aged 30 at the time, who describes the liquidation of the Wieliczka Ghetto in March 1943, the mass execution of Jews near Niepołomice, and the living conditions and forced labor in the concentration camps in Rozwadów and Stalowa Wola. On the 27th of August 1942, expulsion from Wieliczka, Jewish evacuees from Krakow taken. They had lived there since the autumn of 1940 and were expelled from Wieliczka with the local inhabitants. All the Jews there, about 11,000, had to assemble in a square. Around 2,000 Jews that were old and sick were sorted out, put into trucks with the help of the Polish collaborators, and brought into Niepolomsker forest. There they were immediately executed. On the 1st of September 1942, we came to the SS camp in Rozwadów. The SS Corporal Schwamberger was the commander of the camp. His deputy was the Unterscharführer Buschdock. They also had a German Sturmmann for help and 30 Ukrainians as guards. After 2 weeks, 400 more Jews from Volbrum came. They had to do the heavy work in the steel factory. The work was very hard. The Jews who were too weak for it and would hurt themselves working were cruelly beaten by the Germans and the Polish overseers. Everyone who would fall ill, even with the slightest ailment, was shot immediately. Apart from this, Jews would also pass away from the frequent beatings. Every day, about 15 to 20 people were executed by pistol. We had to get up at 4 a.m. At 4:30, we stood for the roll call. Sometimes we had to come only in shirts and trousers and were not allowed to put any more clothes on. During the roll call, we were appointed to different tasks: steel factory, construction division, metal rolling workshop, repair workshop, transport division, mechanical workshop, garage, and the factory's kitchen. They would start to count us, standing in rows of 5. During the counting, some of the Ukrainian guards would take away the Jews' shoes, empty their pockets, take whatever they could find, and administer beatings. They especially enjoyed themselves while beating. On arriving on the first day, we had to give away everything we had on us, under the threat of a death penalty. Then the women and the children were murderously beaten and driven into railway carriages in the direction of Belzec. The sight was a horrible one. Wails, crying, and shouting of around 600 people was so frightful that it was heard from a distance of a few kilometers. When everyone was already standing, the Sturmmann took out his revolver and started to shoot at the crowd, supposedly at the sick, but in reality just taking wild aim. The wounded ones were wrangling on the ground in pain and agony. The Sturmmann stood and looked at them with a sarcastic and sadistic joy, and had pleasure. Most asked him to be shot on the spot in order to avoid so much awful pain. He noticed that I looked very frightened, so he ordered me to occupy myself with carrying away the wounded. Blood was dripping from their faces, so he ordered me to cover the blood streams with sand. They were buried alive. Apart from the hard labor, we prayed every morning we would be brought to work in order not to see the sad scenes. On the way to work, we were beaten, pushed, told to run. If someone fell or became a little tired, he was shot. There were victims every day. When we came to the place of work, we were counted again. Because the Ukrainians were poor mathematicians, the numbers never matched for them. Sometimes too few, sometimes too many. The counting would take hours, during which they beat us savagely. There was a Polish overseer at work, registered as a Volksdeutsch. He took revenge on us, cursed us, hit, swore, robbed us of our belongings, etc. We worked at least 10 to 12 hours. Together with the counting and the walking to work and back for 8 kilometers, a working day was about 18 hours long. 12 o'clock was the so-called lunch hour. We, the Jewish pigs they called us, were brought some water with a few pieces of bread that we had to drink standing. We would often run to the free Polish workers in the factory, who received good food and lived as free people in relatively good conditions, and ask them for food scraps that they did not want or could not eat. But the Poles would rather throw it to the rubbish and did not want to give it to the poor Jews. Schwamberger personally shot Rabbi Frankel, the rabbi of Wieliczka, on Yom Kippur at the time of the closing prayer in 1942. Before shooting him, Schwamberger held the following speech to Rabbi Frankel. Herr Oberrabbiner, I decided to shoot you for sabotage. Schwamberger did it in public, but a pit for him had already been dug and waiting for the whole day. It means that Schwamberger had been preparing for the spectacle. On Yom Kippur, an elderly Jew reported, I have a swollen foot. It hurts. Oh, you poor one, your foot hurts? Zeig mal. The Jew showed it slowly, and the Nazi slowly stepped on the ailing foot and crushed it so long that the Jew almost lost consciousness, and then he shot him. In Stalowa Wola, in the territory where we worked, every inch of the ground was a tomb. Before the coming of the Red Army, the Germans evacuated all the Poles from the neighborhood so that they could not tell what happened there. The territory was covered with tents. They walked around with gas masks, looked for money and things on the bodies of the buried Jews, and then poured liquid in the territory to burn the traces of cadavers. Although the lunch did not last longer than 10 minutes, it meant that it was taking too long, and we got beaten for that again. Going back, we were counted again. The counting would go until late at night because the numbers would never match. We were beaten again because of it. Everyone was searched if we hadn't taken something with us. At work, we would eat uncooked potatoes. We would get bloody diarrhea, twisted bowels, etc. We were not even allowed to go to the toilet. When someone would get sick, he was shot. We would go back in groups of 5. They warned us that if someone would escape, all the others would be shot. Because of that, friendly groups of 5 have formed. In the camp, they would start to count again for hours. We all were tired, exhausted, wet, hungry, beaten, sleepy. Then again in lines for the supper, water with dirty, polluted cabbage leaves that we were given to eat. 1.5 hours in the line, getting beaten, pushed again, and people would collapse all the time, victims of the supper queues. We went to a bath there one and only time. What a bath. We were awfully afraid because there were deaths there. Coming back to the beds, we saw that all our belongings that we had left were stolen, taken away. During the night, we could not sleep because of the moans and cries of the sick. Jews, help, they shouted. Rascals won't count the sick and shout. They should be shot. We all will be shot tomorrow. So what's the difference, a day earlier or a day later? They would stand outside and shoot people. The SS men would enter the barracks and shoot at anyone that happened to be in sight. We suffered thus until the 15th of November 1942. On that day, 250 from the remaining 600 men were selected and sent away to the steel factory in Stalowa Wola. A few days later, we were driven back with SS guards to Rozwadów to dig a grave for all the remaining Jews. About 30 persons managed to escape. Many Jews lost their lives during the Sondereinsätze. We worked for 24 hours without a pause, normally 12 to 18 hours. That means we worked for 36 and for 48 hours without sleeping and without eating. During the rest time, we cleaned toilets, carried water, chopped wood, cleaned floors, dug graves. And doing it, we had to hurry like mad, took blows, were shot at, and we would collapse while working. In November 1943, the SD in green uniforms came. Their arrival meant the liquidation of the camp. It was their mission. They traveled from camp to camp and liquidated them. Liquidation meant shoot everyone. The director of the factory, Schultz, a major in SS, opposed them with the argument that the Jews are needed in the factory. Thanks to him, many Jews were saved from the SS. Jews are qualified workers, and without them, the factory would be forced to close. 270 Jewish workers from more than 8,000 Polish ones. An intervention was made in Krakow, and after 2 weeks the SD, left to Rzeszów. In Rzeszów and in Przemysl, they liquidated the ghettos. The rest of the factory workers from Rzeszów and Przemysl had luck. They were left alive and brought to Stalowa Wola to the factory, because the factory needed workforce. And since a year had been continuously demanding some Jews for work, the Soviets bombed the factories. A bomb hit the factory and killed 3 Jews and 3 Poles. Our joy was great. It meant that the Soviets were coming very soon and that we would be saved. Because some of the bombs hadn't exploded, Jews were sent to dig out the bombs and detonate them. German officers gave the Jews precise instructions how to deal with the bombs, and themselves went away to observe from a distance if the Jews were following the instructions to the letter. For 2 years, we had been planning an escape all the time. We only waited for the approach of the Red Army. One time at night, the commander posted about 30 Jews from his people along the fence in order to prevent escapes. Nobody knew what happened. Suddenly, a commotion at night. These guards had dug a tunnel under the fence, even under the electric wires, and escaped. Hearing the story, no one knew what had happened. The Ukrainians did not know how the escape happened, but we knew. I went out in the darkness with a few more Jews and we tried to look for the tunnel. We found it. A few of us pushed ourselves through and ran in the darkness. The Jewish commander wanted to denounce me. I tried to strangle him, threw him to the ground and ran away. Hearing his shouts, the Ukrainians started to shoot. Soon the whole guard unit of 80 Nazis arrived. Because of the shooting, I could not get out of the territory of the factory, which was fenced with barbed wires. The camp was in the middle of the factory territory. The Nazi guards that had arrived running surrounded me and 2 others and shouted, "Hands up!" Seeing that I was in a trap, I ran to a pile of old metal and hid myself. The Nazi guards hadn't understood what was happening yet. They thought that it was a landing operation. They hadn't even thought that some Jews had escaped. Seeing that it was only me who had disappeared, they started to hunt the 2 others. They actually managed to catch them. I do not know what happened to them. I haven't seen them since. They spent half a day looking for me in the piles of metal, but did not find me. One Nazi was searching not far from me. I hit him on the head from behind with a metal rod. He died. The rest looked for him, but could not find him. I covered him with pieces of metal. I spent 8 days there, hidden, without food, without water, without air. I could not get out because the place was guarded by Germans day and night. I was sure I would never get out of there. There were tens of thousands of metal pieces there. It seems that the tracker dogs could not find me. It is possible that metal also masks the traces of smell.